bad.
What's up? I'm back. Another episode of the Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo, also known as Ricky Vance, and a great episode for you today. Before we get into who our guest is and what we're going to discuss today, let me just apologize for being a little behind on some of my Patreon podcasts and Ricky Rants and Rockfin. Life's been really crazy, and talking to many different people, it sounds like life's been crazy for everybody. And we had a death in the family recently. My wife's grandmother passed away. Then a day or two later, my daughter breaks her arm pretty bad. So ended up spending the majority of that day going from one urgent care to another emergency room. And it was it's been pretty chaotic. And then with work and all these things. But these aren't complaints that I'm going to spend too much time discussing, because everybody's dealing with their own lives and their own things. And I don't like making excuses, but I just wanted to let you guys know why I'm a little behind on some of these episodes. Usually within a week, I can get an episode out. This one's been a little longer, and it's a really, really good discussion that I've been really excited about getting out. Today, my guest is Philip Fairbanks, and some of you guys might know him from his very popular book, Pedogate Primer, The Politics of Pedophilia. So we do spend a lot of time talking about all the things that are in his book and more. But because this is a long-form conversation type of podcast, which I know that's one of the reasons you guys enjoy these shows, we go deep into a lot of other topics he's intrigued with that maybe you haven't heard him discuss in other shows. And he has done some great interviews, which you can find on his website, one of them being Deborah Gets Red Pilled. He was recently, not too long ago, on there, and it was a great discussion, so definitely go in the archives and check that out. But before this intro is too long, let me try to get everything out real quickly. This is a value for value show, so if you want to support the show, we do have a Rockfin channel, which is a YouTube alternative, a video streaming website. You can find Ripple Effect podcasts on there. You can find tons of other people in the alternative media community, like Slow News Day, Jason Burmis, The Last American Vagabond, The Conscious Resistance, Jimmy Dore, Grimerica, Lee Camp, Tinfoil Hat, The Union of the Unwanted's on there, the other show I host with Charlie Robinson, who's also on Rockfin, Sam Tripoli, and Midnight Mike from the OBDM show. Whitney Webb's on there, Richard Grove. I mean, the list, Propaganda Report, the list goes on and on and on. Tons of great people, Vanessa Beeley, Abby Martin. So check it out. You can make a free account and get everybody's free content. And then if you like it, for I think $9.99 or something along those lines, I should really know how much it is. Either way, it's very little for a uncensored platform, access to a uncensored platform with tons of alternative media content creators, including myself. And it's a great way of supporting us. So check that out. I also have a Patreon page. If you want to support me on Patreon, once a month I do a Patreon podcast with my Patreon supporters. And like I said, I know I'm a little behind on that. I'm a little behind on the Ricky Rants and Rockfin, which is my exclusive show on Rockfin, but I'll catch up to that. I'm sure everybody can relate to life being a little crazy and life throwing you curveballs and slowing you down a bit. So the goal is, of course, to do this full time at some point, and then I won't run into these issues because all my time can be dedicated to these conversations. Speaking of uncensored content and an uncensored platform, the latest Union of the Unwanted with Dr. Judy Mikovich returning to the show has been ripped off YouTube. It's still available on Odyssey and still available on our Rockfin channel and on all the audio platforms. So definitely check that out. And that's something I keep telling you guys. Make sure you subscribe to me on Rockfin and Odyssey and Float and Rumble and all the places that you can find the Ripple Effect podcast. And the links are in the show description, because some of these shows are getting attacked again. Please subscribe to us on all the alternative video platforms, and you can find the Union of the Unwanted and Ripple Effect podcasts on all the audio apps, so iTunes, Google Play, Podcast Addict, which is my personal favorite. And please subscribe to those so you don't miss an episode due to YouTube censorship. And also, Rockfin's the same thing. Nothing's been censored on Rockfin. If you subscribe to us on Rockfin, you can get all our stuff, never having to worry about something being removed and you missing an episode. So please do all that. Rate, review, subscribe, tell people about the show, donate to the show if you can on Patreon, or tip us on Rockfin. Get some merch, which I have a new logo finally done and completed, fully edited, and ready to be uploaded into the merch store. So please check out the Ripple Effect Podcast merch.com. Hopefully by the time you check it out, the new design will be available. So do that. All this stuff is in the show description. I also have a great website that I'm so close to releasing and I'm super excited about. There's even going to be a place where you can donate crypto. It's going to have links to all my channels and all my stuff on there. And thanks to Matt from Content Safe, who makes sure that all my content is available in many different places. He's also helping me with my website. So check out contentsafe.co if you're a content creator and you want to find out what he does and how he does it. Thanks again, guys. Hope all is well, and I'll talk to you on the next one. Peace. What time is it there? So you're in the Philippines?
Yeah, it's like 9:43 right now. But you know, I've been up 12 hours, so and had a little coffee just before the show started. Had like a half a cup of coffee 5 hours ago, and then a half a cup of coffee an hour ago, so I wouldn't be tired when I came on.
You know, I'm the same way. I always try to time like my stimulants for shows. Sometimes like I mess myself up where I'll end up
where I won't accidentally be up until 5 a.m, but yeah, still fully awake by the end of the show.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or sometimes like I'll just, I have too much energy, you know, like sometimes I'll just, I'm like, wow, that was a chatterbox that episode. I probably should have toned down.
Been there too.
Yeah. So well, it's hard because it's like these shows, you have all these other things that are going on in your life and you're trying to fit them in. And sometimes it just happens that the show lands on a time where you're a little tired or maybe you have a little bit more energy. So but that's all a part of being human. It's getting all sides of people.
Yeah.
You know, we're different, counting on what part of the day you know we're chatting. So
right.
So let's get into for people listening. I mean, I've heard you throughout the years in quite a few podcasts that I'm a fan of. Past guests like Greg Carlwood and a couple others. And for people who are listening who might have not heard you on some of these other shows, but want to get a little bit of an origin story, your background, how you got into writing, and then we'll take that path all the way to your book, and then we'll get into all the details of that.
All right. Well, yeah, you know, as far as writing goes, that's just been kind of an obsession of mine for years and years. And when it comes to like reporting and journalism, I mean, that's something that I've been drawn to since I was really young too. I think you know, 5th grade, I was a cub reporter on the Mini Standard. You know, the Southern Standard was the newspaper, and they had the Mini Standard, and you know, so I was a cub reporter for that and wrote stories then. You know, my freshman year of high school, after leaving band, I didn't see eye to eye with the band director, and ended up being the only freshman on the newspaper staff. Like if you were a freshman, you couldn't be on the newspaper staff. So I was pretty much the only person in Warren County's history that did, you know, 4 years of journalism at the high school. You know, even like in middle school, I talked one of the teachers into letting me do, you know, we did the Wildcat Wonder at at the school I went to middle school with. So yeah, writing and reporting is something I've always been interested in. Always been kind of had an obsession with writing, and you know, well, you know, as far as a lot of the topics that are in the book that I wrote last year, end of last year, a lot of those I've been, you know, kind of looking into probably since I guess at least like the late 90s and early 2000s. Like, you know, one of my first print publications was in Paranoia magazine, and I did an article about MK Ultra, for instance. and I don't know, it's the kind of stuff that, like, for me, just like with the writing, it's I find these topics, sometimes disturbing, but also I don't know, it's just something that once you've seen that and then you get a whiff of something wrong down this direction, you can't really look away. And that's just, where I've been for years. And I'll be honest, I probably handle it a lot better than I did. I remember in, the early 2000s, my family for a while there, they thought I was going nuts talking about conspiracy theories and stuff all the time. And, here we are like 20 years later, though, and they're starting to see that a lot of the stuff I was talking about, kind of coming to pass. And a lot of stuff that seemed like crazy conspiracy theory, coming true. For somebody who's spent years studying, for instance, like say the Franklin the Franklin scandal, and the Detroit affair, and I was writing about Epstein for years before that was really overtaking the mainstream media cycle for that short period of time it did. But yeah, this topic here, I'll be honest, it's not a fun one to get into, but it is one that I've tried to be somewhat diligent on that beat, because it's something that, like I said, with Epstein, or also another chapter in the book, I talk about the YouTube and social media grooming and exploitation. That's another one of those cases where, not to toot my own horn, but I was writing about these topics for years before suddenly overnight, for a week or two, anyways, for a week or two, it became like a big story in New York Times and all the major papers. um, but yeah, like I said, I feel like it's an uncomfortable topic to deal with, but also something that we have a something of a I don't know, responsibility to not just let it continue to go on, because that's part of the reason why these things are able to happen, is because people lose interest. As big as a deal as the Epstein case is, for instance, I can see it going the way of, like the Finder's Cult or the Franklin scandal, because all those stories of high profile pedophilia instances, and connections with people at the highest levels of power, and then those stories just kind of disappear overnight. I was reading about Bryan Singer, yeah, Oscar winner Bryan Singer, who's one of the main characters in the documentary An Open Secret, which I cite that documentary a few times in the book as well. But Bryan Singer, they were going to write a piece for what was it, Esquire, I think, was going to write a piece, but Hearst Publications, it passed fact checking and it passed legal, and then Hearst was like, "Yeah, actually, we're not going to run this," you know. So it's just so odd. That's just the way it goes, though. A lot of these stories, they need to be told, but there seems to be some powerful interest invested in suppressing them as well. We saw it with Harvey Weinstein, we saw it with Epstein. There's some pretty scary folks who try to suppress some of these stories sometimes. Luckily, I'm the little fish in a little pond. I don't think anybody's worried by me. But for guys like Ronan Farrow, for instance, they're being shadowed by like ex Mossad agents. If you know anything about what he dealt with, uncovering the Epstein or the Weinstein case, for instance. But yeah, regardless of how many people end up reading the book or buying the book, um, it's it was totally worthwhile, all the sleepless nights and the panic attacks, because occasionally, not too long ago, just a few weeks ago, I got an email from somebody who um, was abused as a child, and they read my book, and they found it helpful. And really, honestly, I'll be honest, I'm not expecting to change the world, but if I can make a few people feel a little bit less alone, like, no, you're not crazy. No, this isn't all conspiracy theory. Then so be it. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, there's so many things you hit on that I think are important. I've had people on from the Open Secret documentary. I think his name was
Hmm.
Matthew Valentes. He came on to this. He was, I believe, a Hollywood attorney initially, and then he helped with the documentary. I mean, that's kind of one of the issues in Hollywood is that that's why I thought the title for the movie was perfect, Open Secret,
Yeah.
because it seems like
Oh yeah.
everybody knows about it and nobody's discussing it. I know in past interviews I've heard you talk about Tom Hanks. You know,
Hmm.
when you hear there's a creepy interview of him talking about Weinstein and just
Really.
how like everybody kind of knew and like people kind of heard whispers and it seems like a recurring theme in all these stories. I mean, even with the
Oh
Bill
yeah.
Cosby story, it was only after it became public and kind of
It's
acceptable.
okay to talk about it.
Yeah,
Once their name is burnt, once they've been made the sacrificial lamb, we can pretend, look, this was the problem. It's just this one person over here, burn them down. When really, I believe it's an endemic situation. When we got rid of Weinstein, we didn't get rid of the problem, you know?
good point.
Not to mention, like I said with the Open Secret documentary, I'll, Brian Singer's still working. What?
I know.
He just want, so for some reason, an even bigger issue than, adults being preyed upon. Not that that's not a huge issue, but I'm sorry, I'm going to say it's a bigger issue when it's minors. And not to lessen the other issue, just saying there's something weird about the fact that we're able to come to terms finally with this culture of predation in Hollywood, but we're still ignoring one of the biggest and darkest, facets of that. And by the way, you're talking about Tom Hanks, for instance. Oh, I saw something just this weekend. Nathan Lane in like 2002, 2003, 2004, whatever year Monsters Inc. comes out, and he's at the Oscars and he says, oh, Monsters Inc. Oh, so they finally did a documentary about the Weinsteins, you know, and people groaned. Some people laughed and some people groaned, but everybody in that room got it. 15 years before Me Too, everybody knew. Everybody knew, whether they knew firsthand or just by whispers. Everybody knew.
Well, do you know that the Obama girls, that they actually were interns for the Weinstein,
Oh, that's right.
which
Yeah, yeah. And then went on to work for what's her name? Speaking of girls on the show Girls, I can't remember her name, but she wrote that awful memoir with the horrible, confessions of how she apparently groomed her younger sister. Oh my gosh, can't even remember her name, but yeah.
yeah, I mean, and the thing is, like we're saying, there's whispers. Like everybody kind of knows. How does the president of the United States of America not have heard
Yeah.
of some of these whispers, and he still let that whole story's like confusing to me because I'm like, either he knew it was happening and he was okay with it, or in some way, which seems kind of hard to believe, he didn't know it was happening. But I'm like, you got connections to
Yeah,
the
I don't buy
NSA,
that.
yeah. So I'm like, why would you
Yeah,
put your
somebody close to them would have known, but the checks didn't bounce, and that was the important thing because his name wasn't burnt. And then once his name was burnt, you can pretend, oh, we had no idea. Like I think the same thing with Ed Buck in California. He was contributing to federal, state, and local officials, and that's why he was able to kill young black men, in his house with overdoses on multiple occasions before he finally it even saw a trial for it. But yeah, yeah, I think there's a lot of Hollywood and Beltway back and forth that goes on. I've seen numerous clips where Kevin Spacey used to do campaign promotional stuff for the Clintons, for instance, and it is, it's some people who, the more we've learned about, like, I mean, with Bill Clinton, he's fairly well known as not only a philanderer, but he's been accused of sexual harassment and rape multiple times. Um, and then hanging out, being really close with Kevin Spacey, who also has been accused of harassment and rape on multiple occasions, sometimes with underagers. It does make you wonder if it's just the money, or if they've just got similar interests. I think Robert De Niro, for instance, used to hang out at Weinstein. No, it was Weinstein who would hang out at Robert De Niro's club. Yeah, but like a lot of these people, and then they have money heading to the same old neo-lib candidates over and over again, and I believe that the Beltway folks like the glitz and glamour, and the campaign checks, and the Hollywood folks like the feeling big and important and next to these towering figures in history, and the protection that they might get. Because I do believe, like I said, especially in the cases like Ed Buck, for instance, a lot of people, a lot of really shady people give a lot of money to a lot of people, perhaps in part so that folks look the other way when little things happen.
Yeah, and the thing is, you see it all over the place. I mean, you see it obviously. You look at the Jeffrey Epstein story, which I was kind of the same thought, where I thought this going public and being so undeniable, and his links to everybody from Bill Gates to Clinton to Trump hanging out with them, to I mean just about everybody in science and politics, and it just was a part of this, or at least what seemed to be aware of this guy and what was going on, and partied with him, the royal family. I just thought that people would be much more open to this discussion after this. But it's almost like it's so hard to believe that the worst crime that a human can do is this common
among the most powerful people.
Yeah,
It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. Yeah.
Do you think that's a big reason why?
Absolutely, yeah, because it's easier to just imagine that it's not so. And I I might earn some hate mail right here and right now, but the Pizzagate and the QAnon stuff, a lot of that stuff may have some basis in truth, but then there's a lot of people who glom onto that, and they're sensationalists, and they embellish or just straight up make up things, like something I mentioned on a podcast recently, the frazzle drip thing. Nope, sorry. I know a lot of the backstory on a lot of conspiracy theories that I don't buy, because I think it's counterproductive to focus on whether or not Hillary Clinton drinks baby blood, when there's enough stuff that's on the record that we can point to this, and this is verifiable. And let's focus on the verifiable stuff, and then we'll have time to figure out if Hillary Clinton drinks baby blood later. But first, let's get people on board with the basics, and to do that, you don't have to embellish or do any of that. I mean, there's enough on the records. I mentioned the Project Flickr, for instance. There's that's one that always amazes me. And that's still going on. There's still a bill in the House, specifically to try and do something about the fact that the Department of the Defense and Pentagon and military networks are like 19 in 309 major networks distributing child sexual exploitation materials. Like, there was a guy with top secret clearance at NSA, and he would wipe his computers. I'm guessing the full 32 round Gauss degaussing, where it literally takes a magnet to your hard drive, because he's at the NSA and he knows how that they can recover data. But that's really scary to think of people with top secret security clearance. I mean, it's bad enough what they're doing, but even if you didn't care about the children at all, you got to consider also, at least consider the fact that this is also a huge national security danger. That's a threat to our national security, that we've got people with security clearance who are easily blackmailed by anybody. by, whether it's China or Russia or whoever you want to imagine, uh, would easily be able to get some of these guys on their payroll and be able to get the kind of information that they are privy to, just because of what they're doing, sometimes at their desk at the Pentagon or at their military barracks. Some of them are using their dot mil addresses to sign up for PayPal when they're making payments to these, child porn sites. It's really insane to even consider. And another one of the things that I can't, it's hard to wrap your head around. But like I said, this is real verifiable stuff. It just doesn't get very much airplay, as it should, considering the fact it's still going on anyway. But there was a recent story, for instance, a guy in the FBI in Nashville had a teddy bear sent to his office, and since it didn't have a return address on it, and you can't just mail things without return addresses to the FBI. They got the bomb squad in, and then next thing you know, it's a teddy bear, and it came from this FBI agent's middle school, or like seventh or eighth or ninth grade girlfriend. Like, these are the people who are supposedly responsible for our national security. That's a scary thought, you know. But yeah, and it's so weird because you had the FBI also running these. They actually ran one of these sites. They took it over, and then they ran the site for a couple weeks so that they could get people's addresses and find out who was using the site. But for that time, for a time period, the United States government was one of the largest distributors of child sexual exploitation materials in the world. And at that same time, some of the people buying this stuff were government agents at their government offices, using their .mil and .gov addresses. Like, it's just really insane to think of. ICE was involved in Flickr, and then the FBI was running these websites that they'd just taken over, and the Department of Defense and the Pentagon are distributing these images after they bought them from the FBI. It's mind-boggling. It really is, and it blows my mind. Like I said, that we're whenever we have a slow news day, it makes me wonder, why isn't this being talked about? Because honestly, this is still going on. This didn't stop. It's been going on for years. It's a story that's come up off and on for over a decade now. And it's so prevalent at this point that there's legislation in the House. The In-Network Abuse Act specifically targets the Pentagon and the Department of Defense. They're like, hey, so, about that problem with Pentagon and DOD and how they're distributing child pornography, that's not a thing that should be. And you would think that the American public would want to know where their tax dollars are going to. Hey, are my tax dollars going to running giant child porn sites that the FBI just took over and are distributing to, so that they can be redistributed by members of the Pentagon and Department of Defense? I don't know. I think if more people knew that, there would be some kind of outcry. But for some reason, it's like I said, it's not that much of a slow news day that it doesn't hardly ever get brought up.
Yeah, Operation Flickr or Project Flickr, whatever they named it, it was unbelievable. I mean, how there's even articles written about it where they were, like The Hill did an article. I mean, it's not like it was a conspiracy theory. I mean, they openly talked about
it's not at all a conspiracy theory. It's like there's legislation in the House right now trying to find a way to make our our servicemen and generals and national security agents stop distributing child porn. Not even just downloading it, redistributing it. Like, that's what the issue is. Like, and it makes me wonder, by the way, like, if they weren't redistributing it, would we even know about this? You know,
Good
like I
point.
wonder if that's the reason why. Okay, we do have to nip this in the bud now. They're also becoming one of the world's largest distributors on the DoD networks. If they were just downloading it, maybe we might not have even heard of this. Uh, like that's another thing that I think in the same chapter I mentioned, like with the ambassadors. There were all these cover-ups in the State Department under Secretary of State Clinton, um, and it's I find it so ironic that Jen Psaki, the spokeswoman for the White House, cut her chops lying point blank to the press corps about cover ups by the State Department, what they call the seventh floor group or whatever, which is just these bureaucrats, and it's it's not all Republicans and it's not all Democrats. No, they're just it's just these bureaucrats that they're like ticks. They get stuck to the system, and they last for decades in there. And a lot of those kind of people, I think, have as much or more power than the people that we actually elect. Um, but these folks are, making sure that certain FOIAs don't go out to show that they've been, covering up for certain ambassadors. And sometimes it's drug use, and sometimes it's prostitutes, and sometimes it's stuff to do with children. And Jen Psaki, right in front of God and everybody, she's talking about how it's absurd and preposterous. She said it was preposterous that they would cover up any kind of misdeeds by ambassadors or diplomats. And then like a week and a half, 2 weeks later, less than a month later, there's literally that's another thing I always have to wonder. It's like I wonder if they told her, hey, listen, we're going to have to go ahead and leak this. That yes, we did cover this up, but for right now, we need you to say that it's ridiculous. Because either way, whether or not she was apprised of that or not, like she just seems like the type that would be like, okay, yeah, no, I'll pretend that I never said this the week after that. That works. But yeah, no, it's like I said, the kind of person who would lie bald faced about these kind of issues and cover up of these issues is now in charge of the White House press corps, and fielding their questions. So like I said, it doesn't inspire a whole lot of respect.
Yeah, and the thing is too, you talked about censorship or big tech, their issue or how they're connected to all this. And I don't know if you
Mm-hmm.
remember the East Coast comedian, Boston comedian Barry Crimmins. He was
Yeah.
he had a story because he was molested as a child,
Yep.
and he was a big advocate about it. And he
Great
actually
respect for
sued
him.
AOL. Do you remember that story?
Oh no, I'm not sure.
Yeah, he sued AOL. He was a part of a lawsuit, or because they were basically letting people share child porn on their network. At the time, it was a big deal. So anybody who's fairly young
Yeah.
listening to this might not even know what AOL is. I still have an AOL
Right.
email address, but yeah, AOL used to be a big deal, and AIM was
Yep.
a way of people kind of connecting and talking online, and people were using that network to share child porn, and he proved in court that they were aware of it and they did nothing about it, and eventually he ended up winning, of course, but and kind of exposing them. And it was all they actually document this in a documentary. He passed away some years ago, not too
Mm.
long ago. Actually, I was actually going to have him on the show, but it was roughly around the time where his health started getting poor. And but yeah, he was his documentary. It kind of tells his whole story, and one part of that documentary is this specifically, that the whole AOL case, which people can find online. A similar thing with Twitter. Recently, a comedian and a podcaster, Chrissy Mayer, who's been on my show a bunch, and I've been on her
Mm-hmm.
show, and she was on Twitter, just basically s- tweeting to Twitter, "Hey, here's child porn on your network on your
Yeah.
your social media platform, and you guys aren't doing anything about it, and then there's tons of people underneath saying I've reported this already, I've reported this already, I've reported this already. So it's like it wasn't like they weren't aware of it, and this was during like the height of them locking down on anybody who was right leaning or Trump supporter or a Q supporter, any
Yeah, yeah, the
and
irony.
yeah, I mean the thing with me,
Like
and
regardless of whatever you think
exactly.
about partisan politics, come on, like Jeff Goldberg, for instance, Periscope's a Twitter platform, and he was banned from Periscope for pointing out grooming gangs on Periscope. This journalist notices there's this big problem on Periscope where these gangs of pedos are invading live streams of underage kids, and he's the one that gets that gets the boot from the platform. Another thing that I didn't get a chance to get into in the book, but if I ever do, I'll probably eventually do a second volume, kind of, because there was a lot of stuff that I didn't get to, or that should probably be fleshed out more. Um, but yeah, oh, I forgot where I was going with that.
Well, that's
Oh, I
well.
completely lost my train of
I'll,
thought there. Oh my
don't
god.
don't worry. I do it
Yeah.
all. I do it all the time. I'll go on these long rants to eventually get to a point. By the time the rant's over, I forgot what my
Right.
point was.
Yeah, no, I lost my golden thread there.
but
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, and hopefully I'll come back to
Oh, yeah, that's right. It's the Tumblr. Tumblr that's one of the big pieces of the puzzle as far as Twitter goes specifically. Tumblr was apparently Tumblr and Discord have been reportedly just swamped with pedophile communities. And yeah, they call themselves minor attracted persons, MAP. That's the new term that they like. Uh, and these folks were on Tumblr in large numbers, and then it got to be a big issue that they were sharing child pornography. And I don't think it's any secret that or any coincidence rather. Around that same time, Twitter changed their terms of service. Certain artistic, tasteful nudes of minors are allowed to be shared. And I sadly know the kind of thing they're talking about is there's a number of air quotes artistic photographers and folks like I guess Jock Sturges, Sally Mann, David Hamilton. David Hamilton, uh, did decades of photography of just barely pubescent young girls, topless or fully nude, frolicking on the beach or whatever. And this guy, his books and videos are sold at like Amazon and Walmart.com. And apparently his stuff is completely kosher to share on Twitter because it's art, right? Now, let's ignore the fact that when he turned 80 something, several of the young girls well, they were young girls at the time that they were photographed by him, admitted that they were raped by this dirty old man who makes, it's child exploitation photography. That's what it was. And so it shouldn't have been any big surprise to anybody that the guy that does child exploitation photography has been exploiting children sexually. I mean, he already had been, but he was actually crossing the line physically with them, as well as exploiting them, in the nude in these photos. But yeah, so I almost wonder if they're kind of inviting that kind of vibe. You mentioned Chrissy Mayer, and that there's that the lawsuit where there was, like you said, it's child porn on Twitter, and the victim is like, hey, will you take that down? I saw somebody arguing that, oh, well, we need Section 230 protection. No, brother, I'm on your side. I'm pretty sure this guy, his whole deal was he's afraid porn's going to become illegal. Which hey, I'm not anti-porn, as long as it's not exploitative or coercive. As long as everybody was of age and consented or whatever, then it's none of my business. Shouldn't be anybody's business. Uh, but yeah, no, I'm all about Section 230 protection because that's the kind of thing that allows people to speak uh, without without having their opinions censored. But yeah, no, it's a complete it's stunning hypocrisy from a lot of these big tech platforms because they'll want to censor certain types of thought, and especially there's a lot of it where right wingers or conspiracy theorists or whether it's flat earthers or anti-vaxxers or whoever. Hey, in some people hate that term, marketplace of ideas, but no, seriously, if an idea can thrive in the marketplace of ideas, then the best thing we can do is shut it down through debate, not by shutting it down, because that makes ideological martyrs of the people pushing it. If you got like far right extremists who are racist, or Holocaust deniers or whoever, and you kick them off your platform, what you're in essence saying is, we can't just argue with these people. Our arguments won't be enough, so we have to completely shut them down. I'm something of a free speech absolutist, except for obviously exploitation and coercion, or any other kind of illegal speech, such as threats and things, harassment, whatever. But beyond that, I'm all for the 230 protection. But come on, I think we should all be able to agree that a platform, when they've been alerted to exploitation or harassment or anything hurting children, especially going on their platform, hey, okay, so you didn't see that at first, but now somebody's pointed it out, so now you need to do something about that. And the fact that, like you said, there's that Nigeria thing too. Twitter saying, oh well, having Twitter is a human right because they got rid of the Nigerian president. And so the Nigerian government was like, okay, fine, we're not going to allow Twitter in our country. And then Twitter is all of a sudden, oh, well, having Twitter and an open internet is a human right. So what they're saying is, conspiracy theorists and right wingers and anti-vaxxers have been denied their human rights by Twitter. It's like, is this the hill you want to die on? You really want to say that every time you're banning someone, you're denying their human rights?
Yeah, that's an interesting little scenario right there because, I mean, you're banning a democratically elected president of a country. You did it in our country. Now you're doing it. You're censoring it in other people's countries, and then yet you accuse other people of using social media to sway elections one way or another.
Yeah, exactly.
Which
yeah,
is
yeah.
everybody's
I'm
trying to
way
sway
more
elections.
worried about Silicon Valley than Russia. I mean, just honestly, okay? I'm sorry. Silicon Valley has a whole lot more sway in most of the world's elections than Russia could even dream of. And I'm sorry for all the folks addicted to, this, Russophobia.
Well, remember that if you believe some of the techniques that supposedly they're blaming Russia or China or whatever to sway our elections one way or another, a lot of those platforms that they're using that supposedly that China and Russia are manipulating are social media platforms. So who has more control than China and Russia? The people who actually control those platforms. So it's like they're using those platforms. At the end of the day, the people who are writing the algorithms, controlling what posts are being censored, what posts are being recommended. I mean, they're the ones with the influence, and that's what people should be worried about, because those people behind those platforms, they have ideologies, they have perspectives and opinions. We almost look at AI like it's this right down the middle, no agenda type of thing. But AI or any of these algorithms, they're designed and written by people who do have agendas
Exactly.
and
It's
do have
programmed by
perspective.
their programmers,
E-
so
e-
it's going to reflect their
that's a great way of
their
putting it.
goals.
Programmed by their programmers. Yeah, yeah,
You know.
yeah, and that's what people should be worried about. And
Oh
uh,
yeah,
uh,
absolutely. Algorithmic governance, like that's that's something that I've been really concerned with for years. People talk about like the uncanny valley, and this is something we've been seeing for years too, where some of these algorithms have gotten so good. They're still outliers. These stories of a woman finds out she's pregnant because her targeted ads. You know, but that's happened a few times, stories like that where the ads knew something about the person's life before they found that out for themselves, just deducing it from their other behavior. And it with quantum computing, it's going to get kind of scary with the kind of feedback between algorithmic governance and social media hacking, of consensus hacking. Yeah, I think that people don't realize what a huge threat to not just like sure, to free speech, but I mean just to free thought. Yeah, if you when you control Wikipedia and Google and all this, that's where most people go for their info. So what rises to the top is what's going to sway people. And so the power to hide or promote certain ideas, that's an incredible power.
yeah, and the thing about Silicon Valley, they know their influence, and that's why they're hiring scientists and psychologists, and
Mm-hmm.
they're getting a lot of people in these fields because they're not just trying to. I mean, Silicon Valley is very very similar to like the Edward Bernays story. It's like Sigmund Freud
Yes.
kind of wanted to understand how the brain worked. He wanted to examine and understand the human, and then his nephew Edward Bernays wanted.
Netflix. Yeah.
Yeah, he wanted to
Yeah,
understand how to manipulate.
exactly.
And it's like same thing with Silicon Valley where it's like we like to believe they're just trying to give us what we want and they're trying to better understand us, and it's like what they're really doing is they're trying to manipulate us and control us.
Manipulate,
And
exactly. Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
something.
but they want us to feel like we chose what they've decided for us. Yeah.
Well, that isn't that the thing about marketing, right? So the a little bit of
Mhm.
the issue of capitalism, right? Is this idea that they're the market's just trying to give you what you want, and it's like sometimes, but then other times they're trying to convince us we want something we don't really want, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Which is basically brainwashing. I mean, it was like the Bill Hicks joke,
Mhm.
right? It's like if you're into marketing, I mean, it wasn't really a joke, it was just a statement. He
Yeah,
would
oh
he's
yeah.
like kill
Yeah,
yourself.
absolutely.
It's like if it's like
I love Hicks,
yeah,
yeah.
I mean, it was kind of similar because it's like it's so true. Like it's like you almost feel like it's the root of all evil because it's really brainwashing and social engineering. And I mean, that's why Edward Bernays is known in the marketing field, and a lot of people don't know any the some of the other stuff about him and his book Propaganda and how those techniques were used to sell us wars and get us to buy things we don't even need, which is a huge issue in America specifically. The materialism and all that stuff. You can directly see how this is caused by the market, and I'm all for the market of ideas, like you said. Like I'm 100% with you. You fight bad ideas with good ideas. You
Exactly,
and you
yeah.
don't suppress it.
Don't
Sometimes
martyr an ideology by saying, okay, we just don't talk about that.
because
Because then they think they've won.
well, and it
They'll
makes
say,
it
look,
sexy,
they
right?
can't argue us. They have to just shut us down. And then they take that as a victory. I mean, I've seen I've seen the dark corners of the internet. I know that that's how certain people think when their ideas are shut down.
Well, yeah, it's like the forbidden fruit, right? Like, why are they suppressing this? It's like there must be
Hmm.
something there. They're maybe they're right, maybe they're suppressing the truth, and so it doesn't always work out in your favor if you're trying to suppress ideas. Sometimes it makes people more attracted to them, and so that can be counterproductive. And sometimes that's true, right? Because you look at like a lot of the alternative doctors during the whole lockdown, or doctors that had alternative perspectives on what was going on, that was being suppressed, and it was being
Yeah.
suppressed because they had important information, and that would go against the grain and was going against the mainstream narrative. So in some cases that is what's going on. In other cases, it could be dangerous things, dangerous ideas. Like you said, it could be some extreme right-wing racist. But if you completely suppress him and kick him off all the platforms and don't let him speak openly, then next thing you know, people are looking for him because they're like, "Why? What is it about this guy that's
Yeah.
so
What did they
dangerous?"
have to say that they
Yeah.
couldn't shut down with an argument? Yeah.
There was who's that UK guy? There's now I can't remember his name. He was like kind of banned on all the platforms. He was kind of known as a openly interviewed racist, and I remember he was kicked off on all these platforms. And then a RT show, I can't remember which RT show it was, that had him on and interviewed him. It was like the first interview he did on on a show publicly in a long time. And the host just kind of debated him, and I'm like, this is the best way of
Exactly.
killing his
Yeah.
ideas. It's like you were literally exposing the flaws in his ideas openly, where everybody can see, instead of people just going to, like you said. And the thing about the internet, there's so many little corners of the internet where it's like it's a echo chamber of everybody who feels the same way, thinks the same way. And if you go down that echo chamber, next thing you know, you're like, okay, this makes sense, because so many people are agreeing with these ideas and have the same ideas.
Hmm.
It's like when people openly discuss them and debate them, then that's when you really can filter out the bad ideas, and that's what you need to do. But that's the thing about the topics you're hitting on. I've had Nick Bryan years ago, who did the Franklin Scandal book.
Oh, he's amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's awesome. Not too long ago, I had Craig Solomon Sawyer, who was a part of that documentary Contraland. But even him, right? There's a lot. I've had a lot of people hit me up about like, oh, or this guy. There's some sketchy things about his past, because he was a bodyguard, kind of linked to the Clintons. But
Oh, wow.
yeah, and so some people have sent me articles. A lot of this stuff hasn't been. I've looked into it a little bit, and it doesn't seem like it's credible, like the sources. But I had him on. He seems like a really sincere guy. His daughter, he's a veteran. He has a nonprofit organization called Veterans for Child. What is it? Veterans for Child. I forget the full. I'll look it up. But I'll even send you the podcast when he was on my
Oh,
show.
definitely.
But and then I had him. I host another show called the Union of the Unwanted. I had him on there. That's a big kind of Zoom conference call with a bunch of people from alternative media and thinkers and researchers. I hosted with Charlie Robinson from Macroaggressions, Sam Tripoli from Tinfoil Hat, and then Midnight Mike from the OBDM show. But these are topics, and we did, so I've done plenty of shows on this topic. There's also this researcher, Memory Hold. He doesn't use his real name online because, and he does documentaries on this topic, the Pedogate topic. And one of the reasons why some of these researchers don't use their name, and people think like, oh, this guy can't be credible because he's just a YouTuber or a guy online who does these documentaries. But his documentaries are really well researched. And the thing about some of the research he does, and I've had Memory Hold on my show too, is he goes down some really dark places to find some of this research. And when you watch his documentaries, they tell you right in the beginning, like, don't, you might not want to go on these websites. You might not want, because some flags could come up, and next thing you could get in some trouble. But to find this stuff, sometimes you do have to go down some really dark rabbit holes. And it's just like the internet's full of it, and this stuff does exist. And I think that's a little easier to kind of comprehend, that there are these places in, among the internet, and these if it's the dark web or whatever, or 4chan, if it's 8chan, whatever it is, where people are saying things that are extreme, or showing images that are extreme. But when you see it linked, when it's just people, like if it's people you aren't aware of, people you don't know, it's easier to accept. But when you find out that celebrities politicians, people that you think are good people that you like,
Yeah.
and they're into the same thing. That's the part that I think people are like, that can't be true. It's almost like it seems so evil that people have a hard time believing it exists, that something like that even exists. I don't know if you remember that.
Or if it does exist, it's this type that they've got in their mind of like what a child predator looks like, and he's got the glasses and the mustache. It's always this one specific type, and he's got to look like that. And no, no, that's like I was always a big fan of the show To Catch a Predator, and like Chris Hansen says, the scary thing is it's not like that at all. Sometimes, there was the one show he did, Hansen versus Predator, and it's a guy that he used to, he shared a subway or train ride with on a commute every day, and so no, it's not like that. Uh, it'd be nice if there was just a type and you could just pick them out of a lineup, but it absolutely is not like that. And you mentioned like being anonymous, by the way. Oh, I completely can understand that. I there's about three separate instances where a certain story I did, and then all of a sudden, like a group of trolls, and in a couple of those cases, those trolls, they'll disappear for a while, but they're like bed bugs. They keep coming back. You can get rid of them for a few months, but they'll keep coming back. Uh, and in a few of these cases, I mean, I'm not gonna, I'll go ahead and mention it. It's my mom and sister have been harassed. Like it's not even just me and my life. I could deal with that. I'm a grown man. You want to pick on me, you want to, come to my social media and say crazy stuff. Go ahead, do whatever. But when these people start, messing with my family, yeah, no, I can completely understand why somebody might choose. Because in a few of these cases, like it would be this little army of trolls would pop up right after a certain story, and sometimes, like for instance, the Kai the Hitchhiker story that I've been covering for years. Like that guy. That's another case where very likely I believe that the guy was likely a serial predator, the guy that took Kai in that night, and then there's plenty of evidence to corroborate his story that he was drugged and raped. And this guy, however, was a lawyer, and his brother was the former sheriff, and so all the evidence that would completely prove what had happened, that he'd been drugged and raped by a lawyer who was friends with the DA and the judge, all these crazy conflicts of interest. But yeah, no, I think that kind of thing happens just over and over and over again. That's why, for decades, I mean, think about it, we mentioned Bernays, William S. Burroughs had an uncle that worked with Bernays on the whole, PR and, marketing and public relations, basically pioneering work in that. But Burroughs and fellow beatnik Allen Ginsberg, I really looked up to them as like a teenager. I thought the beatniks, bohemians, oh, so cool, man. Get me a bongo and and a beret, and I'll just be ready to go. And then later, it's like in my mid-20s, I start realizing that a lot of these people that I had idolized, Hunter S. Thompson in Fear and Loathing, like he talks very plainly about he and his lawyer friend basically getting a 16-year-old Christian girl, out of her head on LSD and other drugs, and then having sex with her for days in a hotel room. And William S. Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg, they openly talk about pederasty in their literature. Allen Ginsberg later, stood up for NAMBLA, and let's see, there's so many cases in rock and roll. I mean, like, we would be here all day talking about all the famous rock and roll stars and philosophers, And just time and time and time again, these people who are idolized, it turns out they've got really dark predilections. Yeah.
Yeah, the
I
name.
think I think something about having power and money. This is one thing I've saw as an excuse for, like, child molestation is possibly more likely to occur at the top and bottom of society, because everybody else is kind of, middle class kicks, and rich people stuff is enough for you if you make between 15,000 and 550,000 a year. But once you get to a certain level of poverty or extreme wealth, then you either can't afford middle class kicks and rich people kicks, or rich people kicks aren't even enough for you anymore, and you have to get something, something that's not allowed, and you already got, all the drugs and prostitution and whatever that you want, so it's got to be something really taboo. So I really do think that's part of the reason why we see so much of that. That and the fact that, I don't know, maybe like, when it comes to government and our intel and uh, these the security apparatus, maybe it's because those kind of people are more easily kept under your thumb. If you got some dirt on somebody like that, and like I think that Epstein was likely a blackmail op. We don't have any real proof of that, but if you just look at what was going on there and the fallout, and he summarily died, and it's just, I don't know, it just doesn't sit right with me. I really think that there was a lot more to the Epstein story that sadly we'll never know, because of his untimely death. However you decide to believe how that happened, because at the very least he was allowed to kill himself. Like, nobody can deny the fact that that was some weird stuff that went on. What with the all but one video camera was not working, and both of the guards were asleep, and they'd just been shopping online just before they went to sleep, and they slept so hard that every other prisoner heard him screaming, but they didn't wake up. And then the one video camera that did work, they lost the tape. Like, that's not how things work in the place that we had to put El Chapo, because El Chapo had tunnels. That's you're gonna have to, maybe I'm just too broke to buy that story, but no, I
Well,
don't buy it.
there's way too many coincidences. I mean,
Yeah.
his lawyer was supposed to, if he was going to be taken off suicide watch, his lawyer was supposed to be talked to about it. They're supposed to discuss it to basically approve getting him off suicide watch. So he was taken off suicide watch without anybody approving it, which means that he had to be in a cell with another person, which he wasn't. When you're on suicide watch, because he attempted to kill himself just recently before that. And like you said, the everything from the videotapes to the officers, the correctional officers falling asleep to
And they've now been cleared of any wrongdoing now. Yeah.
and but that's the thing. Like, we always talk about political assassinations in other countries, like it doesn't happen here, and it's like the
Right.
perfect example of, look, we openly knew this guy was connected to so many powerful people. We openly discussed how this guy was not going to make it to court, and then they took him out, and we just move on. And then next thing you know, you talk about something that seems conspiratorial, and people are like, "Oh, that sounds too crazy to believe." I'm like, we literally
Yeah.
just had a child molester who,
There was like a week there where I think it was a tipping point for even the normies. Woke up and were like, "Oh, hold on, come on! You expect me to believe that the guy who had dirt on the royals and former presidents and the cream of Hollywood and some of the brightest minds at MIT, and it was dinner with the Guggenheims, and no, that's just not how the world works. All those accidents for him to be able to kill himself, that's just, like, even people who bought the WMD story, like, because our mainstream media apparatus does a great job of shoveling BS and getting people to just swallow it whole. But that was one of those cases where I think most people, like, yeah, wait, hold on, what now? Like, I thought that guy was no, yeah. I think there for a minute, but United States of amnesia. We're within a few weeks, I think most people did pretty much all but forget that it had happened. And yeah, then you relegate the idea of high profile elite pedophiles to the realm of conspiracy theory, as if we don't have Peter Nygaard, and what was there's the DuPont heir who was raping his 3-year-old daughter and then was put on house arrest. Gabriel Matzneff, who's friends of presidents in France. There was a Casapia in Portugal, and multiple cases, multiple investigations in the UK after the death of Jimmy Savile. And all of those, however, by the way, a lot like Epstein, never went anywhere. And I do sometimes wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that some of the royals were really good friends with Jimmy Savile, and they like to hang out. And I don't know what royals do for fun, but it's probably whatever they'd like.
Yeah, well, remember that movie Hostel? The Hostel, the horror movie.
Oh yeah.
It kind of, it's funny because like this whole pedo thing and just these weird fetishes. That's something you think about. Like what's the motivation? Is it really because one part of the conversation that I think is sometimes missing a little bit is that in some cases, the victim becomes the person creating victims. The victim creates victims.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's somebody was traumatized, molested, whatever it may be, and then next thing you know, they're psychologically, obviously, tortured by what happened, or scarred, or whatever term you want to use, and then they end up doing something similar, and that does happen, where it's just this vicious cycle. But I think in some cases, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that they're like drug addicts that basically have had everything, and that's just the next level of
right. Yeah, the last kind of thing that gives them any kind of rush, and it's just pure
well, you ever hear about
transgressive. Yeah.
you ever hear stories when you hear about like celebrities who have money and they steal something, right? Or like it's like
Yeah, right,
why
exactly. Like Winona Ryder, for instance. Yeah, absolutely.
and it's like why
Uh, it's not because she needs it; it's because she needs to feel alive.
exactly.
She's already had this and this and this, and been loved and adored by millions, and your dopamine sensors become dulled, and you need something big. You need a bigger rush. You need to feel bigger and more loved or more powerful or whatever it is that you're craving. So yeah, I do believe it's possible for people to completely desensitize, their pleasure centers to the point where they crave the worst things imaginable. Uh, and that's another reason why, like I said, for common people who for a guy like me eating red lobster, ooh, that's fancy stuff. The cheesecake factory, I don't know if I can afford it, but sure. I mean, like, for people like that, we've got something that's just out of reach, that doesn't involve like extreme transgression to get our kicks. But for the people who've had it all and done it all, then it just takes more each time. And like, I think that's part of the reason why, with the rise of the internet, people are able to get child exploitation videos and images more easily. And as a result, this is something I've read about, is the rise of what some people call hurtcore, where it's not just enough for the child to be raped on camera. It's got to be brutal and painful and involve like torture for people to actually get anything out of it. And yeah, for any kind of common, ordinary, decent person, this goes absolutely against what we would like to imagine a human can can be like. But I do believe it's a lot more prevalent than anybody really wants to imagine.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is too is we live in a messed up world. I mean, we're a lot of kids, and I think some of these people who become psychopaths or do like some of the worst things, they were children who should have been maybe um been taken care of better, or you send them off to a camp and you don't know who, you don't I know I just, as a parent, I have a 4-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old boy, and
Hmm.
some of the things that other parents do, and maybe it is because I've been down these rabbit holes where I'm a little bit just more conscious that, like, usually the predator could be the most unsuspected person ever. So I
Absolutely.
don't live my life thinking like everybody's a predator, but I'm just like, I'm not leaving my kids at a camp that I don't know who runs it. I don't know who these camp counselors are. I mean, and it's gotten to the point where like my kids, or I'm we're their safety blankets. Like, we're constantly, even if they're doing anything, I'm always there, right? I'm always there. I'm watching. It's either me or my wife. We're there, and we're always watching. There, so if something happens, we're there. If something inappropriate happens, we would see it, or we would be somewhat aware of it. But I see so many opportunities for predators to do stuff, because I know kids that my son plays soccer with that I don't even know what their parents look like, because I swear they don't even stop the car. They push the kid out and just keep driving and then pick them up at the end of practice, because I'm like, where are their parents? And it's like, if something
Yeah.
happened to this kid, how would anybody ever know? Same thing with like kids around the neighborhood. Uh the kids are always out in the street. There's a handful of kids that are always out in the street by themselves from sun up to sundown, and you never see. They come from like a single parent family. You never see their parents out or looking for them or anything. And sometimes, like, I'm just like, what, like. Has this kid eaten? Has he been? It's like, if he was taken, how long would it take before somebody even noticed? It's like, and you see so much that my daughter actually broke her arm playing soccer yesterday, so I had to bring her to the emergency room. And she, we're in the emergency room, and there's other parents, the pediatric emergency room, and there's some parents that are like, you know, they're on their phones the whole time. Their kids are screaming because they're in pain or whatever's wrong with them, and they're telling their kids to shut the f up, and openly, like with other kids in the room, and I'm just like, oh my effing god! I'm like, this poor kid stands no chance. Like, there's no, like, you hope that whatever situation they're in isn't as bad as it seems, but it's just like, these are the type of children that end up being uh you know put in a bad situation where something bad happens to them, or they end up
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
dealing with such a poor home environment or upbringing that they end up dealing with some trauma that causes them to be the people creating the trauma. So it's like, they're just, I don't know, man. I don't even know what my point was. It just, I can see there's so much,
No,
like,
no,
how
I
much of this could be
it's
prevented. How much of this could be prevented if we looked at parenting like it is the most important job ever. Like, we should be nurturing and caring about our kids. You shouldn't just have kids to have kids. Like, make sure you have time for them. Make sure you don't just send them off to um to whatever, to some daycare the second they're born, and then basically, the daycare is the ones raising the kids. Because I mean, you hear a lot of these stories about, like,
yeah.
obviously, I'm Portuguese. I was born in Portugal, but so you hear stuff about the Catholic Church, of course, and even though I'm a
Mhm.
atheist, or I'm whatever, I don't know what I believe. I'm still undecided on that, but I'm not against religion, but I think there's pros and cons to it. But you see that in the Catholic Church, like, it's a lot of it's just like over trust of these people. You see it with kids who get sent off to camps, like, oh, just send them off to a camp, and that guy seems like a good guy, and they seem, it's like, oh, he's great with kids. I'm like, who else is really good with kids? Predators. They love kids too
Yeah.
much. It's like, so it's, you see it over and over again. It's like, we almost have too much trust in, or it, like it's some of what you said, where these stories have been so suppressed. I mean, what was it? Amy Robach, right, who worked for ABC, talked about having the whole Epstein
Mm-hmm.
story on a hot mic and saying how they didn't want to touch the story, and they wouldn't let
Because
her.
the royal wedding was coming up, and
Exactly.
exactly,
So
yeah.
how different would some parenting be if they just were aware of how common this was? And the other thing too, right? So the other argument is you get a lot of like new parents like myself who say, "Oh, when we were growing up, I felt safer being outside, and this type of stuff didn't happen. Now you got to be a little bit more concerned." So you get people who are nervous and uh they understand this is a issue, but I don't know I'd like to get your opinion on, do you think that there's some truth to that, it's just more common now, like child predators and all this stuff, or is it just we have more access to that information where if somebody was
A little bit, yeah, yeah. I mean, like, I think that it may be on the rise, but more so, we just have more data. Like, if it's an almost negligible amount, if it's more now, but probably exponentially growing at this, negligible to noticeable level, just year by year. Uh, but yeah, like one thing you're talking about, it doesn't even take sending the kid to a camp or a daycare or having a babysitter or leaving them with family who are sketchy. It doesn't take, or a friend of the family that's sketchy. It doesn't take any of that anymore. When I was a kid, some of my parents were really strict, but I had some friends whose parents were not nearly as strict. And, back in those days, there was the whole like idea of kids, there's the latchkey kids and, being raised by the television. Being raised by a television is terrible, but at least there's not a probable child predator on the other end with a keyboard and a webcam, which is, from about the late 90s to the 20 teens on, when especially when smartphones and social media and all that kind of thing becomes really common. Like, in the early 2000s, there were all the parenting guides were, make sure that your children only use the internet in the family room, and now, like, there's 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds who've got smartphones. And, I don't know if that's a great idea. Um, you know, uh, but yeah, the internet opens up a whole new way for children to be groomed and exploited, and that's another thing that you have to be concerned with, apart from who they're seeing in the physical world, is because like I said, that with Periscope and YouTube and Facebook, especially the Zuckerberg platforms, apparently, WhatsApp, Facebook, and Instagram have had a huge amount of exploitation and grooming, and then sharing and distributing of exploitative materials. Sometimes, like they'll have a kid that once again they make easier prey if they don't have anybody in their life to talk to, or if they can't go to their parents, or if they're craving affection and attention. All those kind of things definitely put a bullseye, a target on a kid's head. And then they get online, and they might meet somebody who talks them into, this is one of the tools of the trade, tricks of these groomers, is they'll get a kid to send one picture, and then they use that okay, you don't want all your friends and family to see this, do you? Okay, now you're going to have to send me more. And then they escalate and escalate and escalate their demands. So that kind of thing goes on. And when it comes to even more marginalized kids, and a lot of times these kids that end up getting trafficked time and time again, this is another one of the things that if I do a second volume of this book, should definitely be mentioned is, the problem with child services programs across the United States, where so many of these kids just disappear, and then they're later found getting round up because they were picked up for prostitution, which is insane, by the way. I'm sorry, but like, an underage kid who is engaged in that kind of behavior, there's a story behind that, you know like no 15, 16-year-old kid is like, hey, I think maybe I'll drop out of school and sell sex, you know? Like, no, there's something behind that. There was some coercion or some, abuse situation in their past. There's some reason for that to have happened. And those people need help. But as for who from, I don't know. Like, let's not send them back to the same Department of Children's Services that lost them in the first place. Like, how do you lose a kid and they end up, trafficked? How do you, I mean, Child Protective Services, it's in your name, It's literally in your name. You got one job. It's Protect Children Services, So, but yeah, in all these cases, I think one of the threads for all this is definitely, marginalized kids are a bigger target. So, I definitely encourage people, if you got kids, make sure that they can talk to you. And I'm sure that can be hard sometimes. I don't have kids. It's easier for me. I'm a proud uncle. But no, I mean, like I said, I was raised in a really strict upbringing, which I appreciate it more and more as an adult. Not all the time as a kid, though. So it's a really it's a real tightrope to walk between keeping them safe, but not being too much of like a helicopter parent, or because once again, and you can't freak out over every little thing that they say, because once again, if you're in a position where your kid doesn't feel safe coming to you with anything, then the things that you most need them to come to you for, they might not feel comfortable speak. I mean, like, if a situation like that, whether it's a teacher or a coach or a babysitter or whatever, a neighbor, any kind of a situation like that, it's going to be hard for them to talk about it. But
that's such good advice.
Especially if you don't have like a close line of communication with your kids. And like I said, I don't know, I can't tell people how to parent. I'm not a parent, but like I said, I do believe you have to kind of walk a fine line between keeping them safe, but also letting them know that if they have something important to say, you're a safe place for them to come to with their issues and their problems and their struggles, without being too judgmental and on their case or whatever.
Yeah, well, the thing is, like you said, if you overreact when they tell you something, then they're going to be less likely to come to you to tell you something in the future. So it's like, that's why, and it's funny you say this because you're not a parent, but you understand that the psychology of it. And it's
yeah.
It's for me, it's the same way. Like when my kids come to me for something, and if I know they messed up, they broke something or whatever it may be, they got hurt because they were doing something they shouldn't have been doing. My first reaction is like, try to stay calm, because if I overreact, next time this happens, they're not going to come to me. So it's like, first try to stay calm, and then when all the emotions are kind of relaxed, then that's when we talk about it and we can kind of discuss what happened. But yeah, there's always that danger of overreacting, and then next thing you know, they won't tell you. I mean, my parents were notorious for that. Like my mom would get so mad at me for anything that I ever did as a kid, that when I broke something or messed up or whatever. And so I wouldn't tell my mom anything. Till this day, I tell her as little as possible. I think it's just like, it's deep rooted in our relationship, where I'm just like, I don't want to. I really don't want her to inject her opinion on every little decision I make. So let me not tell her. It just makes life easier. And so, without a doubt, I mean, that's a great way of going about it. When we had Craig Solomon Sawyer on for Veterans for Child Rescue, that was the name. I remember. I actually sent you the links via email also on
Oh,
just
nice.
his interviews that he did on my show, and then my other show, the Union of the Unwanted. And one thing he would talk about when we were talking about parenting, and he has a very personal story. That's why, you talk about being discredited, or your mother or your sister being attacked. That's why I believe that Craig's also probably a good guy who maybe does have some links to maybe the Clintons. But I mean, if you have a private company where that's what you do, you're a bodyguard. It can happen that one of your clients ends up being somebody maybe you don't like.
Yeah, right.
And if you're just
It's a
a
job.
typical veteran who didn't go deep into these stories, you might not realize that the people you're working for maybe had links to the Epsteins and Jeffrey Epstein, and had links to some of these other kind of sketchy people. I think from my personal experiences with him, I think he's a good person. I think the more there's more and more people discrediting him. Like he had a couple people online that were like their life goal was to like discredit this guy, and but he has a very personal story too, where his daughter was taken, and I don't know if she was held at gunpoint or knife point or something like that, but it was a very personal story that was also a motivation to get involved in this. And he did that documentary Contraland, and he was unaware of how big of an industry this is, like the amount of money that people make using, child trafficking, child porn, all this type of stuff. And so that's one of the things that makes me nervous. It's like, oh my God, like this is such a big industry that it kind of does make sense that they would discredit somebody like him, or maybe harass somebody like yourself who's trying to expose it. I mean, this is you ever watch the documentary Tickled? It's
Yeah, I think I remember hearing about that,
yeah.
where it's like this kind of underground world of tickling fetish films, right?
Yeah, and then there
Yeah,
was this
yeah, I do
journalist,
remember hearing about
there's
that.
this documentary filmmaker who was basically just found this weird website and was kind of looking into it, and found out that there's these rich and powerful people behind it, and they went to like crazy lengths to discredit him and threaten him and all these things. And it's a pretty wild documentary. And but the way I think it's related is that, one, you see how behind a lot of this is powerful, rich people who can they do have the resources to discredit people who are looking into this, and attack people who are looking into this, or like we talked about the ABC story with Amy Robach. They
Hmm.
can put a halt to the story
Just kill
before
it.
it's public.
Yeah.
It's scary, because it's like, okay, you see all these really rich and powerful people connected to this. You see it's in Hollywood, it's in politics. Is it like just about everywhere? And is it even maybe deeper and darker than our understanding of it? Because it's like, it seems like it's acknowledged, it's accepted, and everybody's involved almost. It's almost like the world. I mean, I forget who said it. I'd love to give him credit. Like, the world's run by pedophiles, and it almost seems like it at times. And then when you see, I know the whole QAnon thing that kind of was trying to discredit some of
Yeah.
the Pedogate stuff, because
It's a really convenient straw man.
it is
That's
absolutely.
and what's ironic is like I worry all the time that my book's going to be oh well, we can't sell that anymore, that's one of those QAnon books, when it's like, now if you actually read the book you would know that's not the case. I know a lot of people who got into that, and a lot of them are really great people, but I didn't personally. I was never a Trump supporter, so why would I support the idea that Trump is secretly saving the world? I don't necessarily think he was as bad as they sometimes made him out to be, but same token, also don't believe the whole QAnon narrative. Which, once again, though, like I said, with the QAnon thing and Pizzagate, there are some things that were talked about there by either Q or initially with the whole Pizzagate thing. That, like I said, like Elefantis's social media, dude. That was not the social media of a normal, healthy person who's probably not a pedophile. No, definitely not at all. But once it gets like, I don't know. Like I said, it's hard to separate the truth from the from the falsehood with a lot of that stuff, and that's why, like I said, especially with this book, I tried to stick with what's verifiable as much as possible. I don't go into a whole lot of conjecture, because that's counterproductive. It's like, well, the last thing we need is to get on a debate about whether or not Hillary Clinton drinks baby blood when there's so much on the record, like with Epstein and Detroit and the Finders Cult, and there's all these cases for decades worldwide, that pop up every now and then. Just the fact that they pop up and then they disappear from the news cycle. Like, if that doesn't tell you something about the way things work in the world, like I said, mentioned earlier, the Bryan Singer story, they sent it to the fact checkers and they're like, yep, it looks like Bryan Singer, Oscar winner, is a child molester. Then they send it to the legal team and they're like, yep, we are not going to get sued by child molester Bryan Singer. And then they're like, then Hearst, the people up at the top at Hearst are like, no, Hearst Publications would like to kill this story directly at this point. And it's like, why? Why would you not want that story told? Why do you want to cover for these pedophiles over and over and over again? Like the person who was responsible for getting that hot mic tape leaked left whatever it was, ABC, and went to, I can't remember if it was NBC or CBS, and got fired from them, got fired by another company for leaking the hot mic tape. So it's not even like a competition between the big three. No, they all pretty much are standing firmly on this. Hey, now we're the mainstream media, and we do not take kindly to people trying to expose us for covering for pedophiles. Evidently, they don't like that. They don't like that at all.
Well, you're absolutely right. There's so many actual cases of things that we can talk about, that whole, and that's the thing. There is a concern about lumping all this stuff together, right? The Pizzagate stuff. I mean, there's absolutely some weird stuff involved with that. The owner of the pizzeria, his Instagram posts. I mean, all the weird art stuff, all the weird child stuff. I mean,
Yeah. The house band was constantly making pedophile jokes, if you could call that. Like, the art on the walls are all have child abuse themes. It's like, no, that's not all coincidence either.
Well, and Podesta was into a very similar, like, kind of weird art, right?
Oh yeah, him and his brother. And this is something that, once again, it's not controversial, and it's been briefly covered here and there. But yeah, incredibly disturbing art collection. Like, I don't understand anybody who would spend millions of dollars to put images of children being tortured, like in their underwear and topless. Like, I mean, like, I'm seeing it in my head now. I hate this, because like I've seen some of the art in the Podesta's collection, and like, I do not encourage anybody to seek that out, by the way, because like I said, I'm seeing it in my head now, and like a little kid, maybe like 7-year-old kid, maybe like hanging from a wall in their underwear and topless. And it's like, who is gonna spend $1 million to hang that on their wall?
But isn't it crazy that that's on his wall, and it's like, so you figured that the crowd,
like advertising,
the crowds that he hangs out with, right? So you're talking about famous people, powerful people in politics. You think very well spoken, very well dressed, elegant people, and yet it's completely acceptable to walk into one of those people's houses and see that stuff on the walls. It's like, it boggles my mind that there's not even a bit of concern about the people walking into your house being disturbed by that, which makes me
Yeah.
think they're all on the same page. Like this is
Right.
just
Right. Well, like I said, just like with Hollywood and the open secret there, it's like you're either in on it or you were okay with it. Apparently, that's how the game is played. Like, I don't necessarily believe they're all pedophiles, no. Uh, but most of them who aren't are apparently okay with keeping the secret. Like, that's how that works. Um,
well, and then not just Hollywood. I know we were talking about Singer who does the X-Men movies, but when you go back to Disney and a lot of this stuff
Nickelodeon too,
yeah, stuff that's focused and marketed towards kids. I mean, all the symbolism and weird stuff. Jay Dyer, who I know you're aware of his work, and he's been on the show a few times. He goes deep into this stuff. And again, like how many dots do you need to connect before it's you can start accepting it as more than just a coincidence? It's like you're starting to see too many weird things that it's like, okay, well, it's more than a coincidence. The whole Podesta thing, the whole pizza gate thing, the pizzeria thing, like all that stuff was like, oh, that's been debunked. And then I'm like, well, have you really looked into it? Have you? I'm like,
right.
I'm like,
Yeah.
you can't debunk that many weird things. Like you can say like, there's no proof, there's no actual evidence, but you can also look at it from the perspective of there's enough stuff to where it's like it's not out of the realm of possibility that there's something more going on here, because this is, I mean, as a adult who, I wouldn't be okay with those images on my wall. I wouldn't be okay with those images on my social media
especially
page.
at a supposedly family-friendly pizzeria, to have a pedophile house band and somewhat abstract like that's one thing I'll give the Comet Ping Pong place is like there was a lot of art with child abuse themes, but it was more abstract. You couldn't quite tell what was going on in those paintings, at least. Like the Podesta stuff, no, that was graphic. But the stuff at Comet Ping Pong, like unless like the artist and what they were trying to portray, it might just look like, oh, what is that? It's a bunch of stick figures. It's a big stick figure doing something to a little stick figure. It turns out that the something is child abuse. But yeah, like I said, there was definitely something kind of weird about Elefantis and and that pizzeria. But yeah, as you mentioned, just saying it was debunked. It's a magic word. Just say it's been debunked enough times, and that debunks it. Apparently, like that's one of the things. Like, you see Wikipedia and Snopes. Like sometimes they're a little tricky with the way they word things. Like there was what was it? Something to do with Kamala Harris saying that she believed the victims who had come forward saying that they'd been sexually harassed by Joe Biden. And Snopes listed that as a mixture of truth. They went on to, once again, you set up a straw man and you attack that. And you're like, well, some people were saying that Joe Biden, that she believed that Joe Biden had raped people. And it's like, no, nobody thought that. We all knew what she meant when she said, yes, I believe his accusers and believe that they are brave for coming forward. No, I mean, like everybody knew what she meant when she said that, and to rate that as like half truth. Well, that's your debunkers. That's the debunkers of the world. So
that Joe Biden
like I say,
thing is just so creepy.
They're very creative with the way they use truth. They will bend and abuse truth until it fits the narrative that they want for it, apparently.
Yeah, Snopes does it all the time. There'll be a story of you actually, some of these debunkers, sometimes people just look at the article like, oh, it's been debunked. They don't even go into details.
Yeah, they just look at the rating. And sometimes you look at the Snopes, and then it's always buried in the last paragraph where they're like, though it's true that claim. It is also true that nobody was saying this, though, Snopes. Why are you bringing that up? Like that's it. So we give this a mixed rating or a false rating, and it's like, wait a minute, you just added something that like, and sometimes I wonder if that's what the Alex Joneses of the world, like what their job is, like they embellish something just in a certain way that then people can attack it and be like, see, now that's not true though, you know. Which is once again, like I said, I don't think we do ourselves any favors when we embellish or sensationalize. This kind of research. Like I said, I was writing about MK Ultra and Disney and Nickelodeon and pedophilia and those companies, like the editor of Paranoia magazine like 15 years ago. We wrote back and forth about mind control and child grooming media companies like Nick and Disney, and because it's just very clear when you see what happens to those child stars that something not wrong or something not right is going on there. So yeah, then when the Pizzagate thing and then QAnon a year or so after that, like I'll admit at first I was like, whoa, people finally know that Unilever ice cream, heart within a heart, is also the same symbol that child lovers, they called themselves before, minor attracted persons. Pedos, it can't stand to be called pedophiles for some reason. I don't know why, So they always have invented other names for themselves throughout the years. But yeah, like the FBI symbols that pedophiles use to identify one another. I was really excited when all of a sudden it was like, whoa, this is getting mainstream now. Then I realized, oh no, once again, there's people like sensationalizing or embellishing, which just makes, for your average person, they go, oh no, I've heard that's all that crazy stuff. That's all that crazy stuff. And I do sometimes almost wonder if like all these really off the wall, there's an underground video of Huma and Hillary eating a child's face off, everybody. And it's like, no, isn't it also equally possible that this theory was thrown out there so that ordinary people would find it that much easier to discount, like, hey, why is it that Epstein hung around with Bill Gates, who had a live-in engineer on his property who was up on like all these like found with all these child pornography images on his hard drives, and then he never saw any jail time? Like, what's up with that? What's up with the all these rich and famous billionaire pedophiles, like multiple, like I said, Nygaard, DuPont, Epstein? Like, it's not just one, it's multiple that we know of. And there's only so many billionaires, right? So if you can name at least one hand worth of billionaire pedophiles that have been alive, like let's go ahead and count Epstein, that have been alive in the last 5 years, that's a big problem considering there aren't even that many billionaires. So, and once again, like I said, when we see that with enough money, you can have these kinds of stories shut down, kind of makes you think, well, whether there are more or not, there definitely could be, because apparently, once you get like a certain amount of money, you can hire ex-spooks, whether they're CIA or Mossad or whatever, and they will follow around reporters like Ronan Farrow, and they will harass people, and they will do whatever it takes to try and kill, get a story killed. And people will lose their jobs. Like I said, that whoever it was that helped get that hot mic tape leaked, just over and over again, though, it does make it very clear that, when you have that intersection of power and money and just absolute evil, then on the one hand, it's the money and the power makes it easier to cover it up. But on the other hand, just the fact that the scale of that kind of evil, people don't want to imagine that it's possible either, which is just yet another reason why it's easy for people to turn, like people would rather believe that it's all a crazy conspiracy theory, and I don't blame them. Like if like when I see people online talking about how they're so glad that Joe Biden finally freed the kids in cages, and I'm like, oh wow, so you guys didn't know that there's actually like 10 times as many, and some of the facilities that were shut down under Trump because they were so like terrible have been reopened, and they're actually more crowded than ever. It's like, and then I'm sitting here and I'm like, boy, it must be awesome to be in their head, like imagine if like for me, I don't vote Republican or Democrat. I don't have a dog in that race. So it's a lot easier for me. Like I don't care if it's Weiner or Gates. When I see like, oh wow, I have no qualms in covering a story like that. Bannon, for instance, I recently learned that Bannon has an Epstein connection via one of the guys from Digital Entertainment Network, Den, which Geffen of Geffen Records was one of the people pumping money into that. And I do believe that it's pretty likely that a lot of the people involved in putting money in that knew that it wasn't gonna be a streaming site. It was the early 2000s. You couldn't have a streaming site yet. We didn't have the bandwidth for it. But yeah, no, I mean it's a lot easier to believe though that it's just a debunked conspiracy theory, I'm sure. But no, once you've seen enough of the evidence to know that this is an endemic issue that doesn't belong to one political party or one country, this is something that we see over and over again with like I said, corporations and religions and cults, and it just over and over and over again. And once again, like the crime is like the cover up is as bad as the crime in a lot of cases. Like you mentioned the Catholic Church, and it's not just the Catholic Church either. I was raised Southern Baptist, but I pulled no punches there either. I made sure. I think I wrote more about the Southern Baptists than the Catholics because everybody knows about the Catholics now. Like that's synonymous. But a lot of people probably don't know that the Southern Baptist Convention and the LDS and the Seventh Day Adventists and the Hasids and the Amish and the Mormons and the Scientologists and just over and over and over again, all these different groups, Oxfam and UNESCO and the UN peacekeepers, all these organizations. That's another one of the big issues, by the way. When you see an organization, whether it's a church or a charity, and it's like your job is to do good in the world, and you betrayed people's trust. And once again, a lot of times these organizations, instead of just dealing with the issue head on, you know what? We screwed up and we're sorry. No. For some reason, they're willing to throw tons of money just to make sure that it doesn't hit the news, or if it does hit the news, that like I don't know how much money. It's a ridiculous amount of money. For instance, going back to the Catholic Church, that they spend to make sure that kids who are abused don't get paid anything. Like that just blows my mind. But yeah, like I said, it really is, I do believe, an endemic issue, that it's not one organization, it's not one political party, it's not one country, it's not one religion. It would be so convenient if we could just point to one group and be like, look, it's them over there. But no, this issue is endemic to the world, and it manifests all throughout. I also believe that it's a problem that we've had since the beginning of time, and we're not going to be rid of it anytime soon. But at the very least, we got to demand more accountability. Like I said, the fact that that Congress is still trying to just for it's been over 2 years, I think. They've been trying to pass a bill to end network abuse by government officials, by the DoD and Pentagon and military, that involves distributing child sexual exploitation materials. Like, if we can't even get a handle on that, you know, or like I said, going back to the Department of Children's Service, losing kids who end up trafficked. If we're falling down, if we're breaking down at these fundamental points, then like we got to start somewhere. And I guess one place we start is just, and I hope that I'm not being naive and idealistic here. I mean, I've got to believe that this is true. I've got to believe that by raising awareness, maybe we can affect some change. But at the very least, like I said, for folks who are aware of some of what's going on, just so that you know that you're not crazy, because we get gaslit sometimes on social media, and when you see like the news ignoring certain things in favor of other things, it's easy to become, I guess, black pilled or crestfallen. But that's another important thing. That's something that I would I guess leave people with for sure is like, let's say you get my book. It is a product of pain. It's something I've mentioned a few times before, is like, while I was writing that book, I ended up, I have nightmares sometimes, and I have occasional night terrors. And off and on throughout my life, I've had occasional like anxiety or panic attacks. While I was finishing that book, they really struck. And the reason for that being, well, obviously, I was spending 10 to 12 to 14 hours in a day from morning to night, just reading the most awful, just in dealing with these awful subjects. Like, I remember going through the Finder's FBI vault for weeks upon time, until it got to the point, there's something called the Tetris effect, I learned. And that's what was going on. Like, if you play Tetris nonstop, you'll see Tetris bars in your dreams. In my dream, though, I was seeing like redacted text from FOIA documents. But yeah, if you do read about this kind of thing, if it's good to be aware of. But another thing that you might not be aware of is you cannot spend all day and all night of every day on this stuff. It's not healthy. So once again, one of those things where you'll have to find the balance. It's a balancing act, and you'll have to find the balance yourself. But you do have to take a break once in a while for your own like mental well-being, because something I've said many a time. Like, some people don't care enough, and some people care too much. And if you care too much, you got to mind your own mind. So yeah, for the folks who are trying to raise awareness, I understand it's hard to get people to acknowledge this stuff. But I would say stick to the verifiable, and understand that you and other people will need breaks sometimes, because it hurts. It does. It honestly hurts.
Yeah, it's I remember here when you were on Deborah Gets Red Pilled, Deborah talking about
Mm-hmm.
how she was reading your book, but only a little bit at a time because she had to put it
Yeah.
down. And it is one of those topics where it's super difficult to really spend much time going down that rabbit hole and talking about and discussing. I mean, I all the shows I've done in the past on this topic, if it's with Nick Bryan or whoever it may be, it's you get this sense of like, I need to clean myself after that episode.
Yeah.
Like, I need to cleanse myself of good thoughts.
Yeah.
With good thoughts, because when you spend so much time only staring directly in the eyes of evil, you almost forget there's good in the world also, so it's hard. And the thing is too is like, this isn't a political topic. People like to make it a political topic, but there's stories like Craig Spence, who's linked to Bush Senior and Reagan, and there's
Mm-hmm.
stories like Laura Silsby linked to
Dennis
Dennis
Hastert, and
Hastert.
yeah, and Weiner, and when people try to score political points over this stuff, like I honestly think that's just disgusting. Like how could you look at what one case and then you're like, oh wow, that's awful because that's the other team. Like this is not a team sport issue. Like if there's a problem with somebody in a position of power, like it doesn't matter if you liked their movie or if you voted for them or whatever. It shouldn't be about that. Like you should be able to, whether you liked the person before. Like, I mean, honestly, I was a huge fan of Kevin Spacey. I was a huge fan of Woody Allen. I One of the ones that hurts me the most, it's weird because Woody Allen was like one of my favorite filmmakers from 11, 12, 13 when I first saw Zelig, up into my 20s. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, wow. Like it was weird enough, this stuff with Sun Yi. Then I found out about with his stepdaughter, and she's like 6 or 7 years old at the time, and that was just no, uh, and I hated that. And seriously though, maybe even more though was not being able to watch Ren and Stimpy anymore, because I don't know, because that goes back even further than that right at or right before puberty when I discovered Woody Allen. He became like, oh wow, I love this guy's sense of humor and he's so witty, and but no, even before that, when I was a little younger, like 8, 9, or 10, was when like, whoa, this Ren and Stimpy thing, this is so like edgy and cool. And then I find out, oh well, great. So he was grooming multiple teenage girls while he was working at Disney, and some of his coworkers knew. Well, that's just, not good. Some people actually knew. People said that they were creeped out, and he would like draw like sexually inappropriate things with teenage or young characters, and this was just a thing that went on that people knew about. And like one of these young girls that he was grooming and he had move in with him was actually working with him at Spumco, which was his little production company. And I hate that because I really liked Ren and Stimpy. Like a lot of great memories from when I was very young, and that was just the coolest thing on television. Uh, but no, I mean, like, you can't excuse someone just because you like their art or just because you like their politics or whatever. We've got to hold people to a standard, and if we turn it into a popularity contest or play politics, that's just gross. That's really gross.
Well, Kevin
Like
Spacey,
for instance,
yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm with you with Kevin Spacey. I mean, some of his
yeah,
movie. I mean, I was
genius.
so it's but what? It almost makes me re-look or re-examine some of his old work, like American
Oh,
Beauty,
right.
right? It was
Where he's playing like this bad guy and nobody suspected him. Wow.
yeah. Well,
you
wasn't
know,
well,
so maybe the plot twist in that one movie was that Kevin Spacey was secretly a bad dude all along and had everybody convinced that he was just a
yeah, and like the
lovable guy.
Life of David Gale was one of my favorite old movies. It was like, but him playing all these disturbed people or slightly weird or I mean, it's almost like he's playing himself now. Like,
Yeah,
not,
yeah, absolutely.
it's
And
like,
you were talking about people being abused, like his brother, his brother was like a Rod Stewart impersonator and limo driver, who said that their father was basically he was a member of the American Nazi Party, I guess, Lincoln Rockwell and all that, and his dad sexually abused his sons. So, once again, in a lot of these cases, it was abuse that, created like, and I've heard some stories where, perhaps Epstein was abused too. Um, and there's lots of cases where, some young girl is a sex slave, and next thing you know, she is training the young girls who have been picked up off the street. So yeah, in a lot of cases, these monsters are created by being victimized by other monsters. So we definitely do ourselves no favors by ignoring the issue, because it does. It's exponential. The monsters breed more monsters.
Yeah, and anytime I brought it up, I think I brought it up a few times when I think when Ryan and Whitney Webb from The Last American Vagabond were on, and in past episodes I've kind of brought it up a little bit, and you see people like Nick Bryan or Matthew from the Open Secret documentary, they push back a little bit because it's almost like they didn't want to humanize the monsters they were trying to expose, but it's like I wasn't trying to humanize it as much as I was trying to understand it. And
Right.
I think that's a part of kind of fixing the problem too, is understanding
Right.
how does this
The
happen?
roots of it, exactly.
Yeah.
You gotta nip it in the bud to keep it from growing. Exactly. And that involves saying, like, these monsters don't come from nowhere. They came from a situation that we let grow unchecked. And yeah, so yeah, I don't think it has anything to do with justifying their behavior, though. No, I absolutely wouldn't say I'm justifying Kevin Spacey or Epstein just because they had, an awful life. I mean, like, have you heard of Henry Lee Lucas's personal life story? It was awful. He was abused by his family members physically and sexually. But that doesn't mean it's okay that he went on to kill, depending on whose count you keep, dozens or hundreds of people. Dozens probably. I don't buy that he killed as many people as they pinned on him. He just liked to eat well in prison, you know.
Yeah, well, without a doubt, these are hard conversations, and they're rabbit holes that some people don't want to go down. I think that's some of the skepticism. I think with people with a lot of this stuff, it's like the Epstein thing happened, but and then it's almost like, I mean, but we know so many, like the internet is full of really dark things. I mean, that Q documentary that came out on HBO not so long ago, and that filmmaker actually did a really good documentary back in the day called Terms and Services.
On
May
Facebook. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was about terms and services. Basically, I think it's called Terms
Yeah,
and
yeah,
Services May Apply.
exactly.
And but if you look at the Q documentary, it's when they go into, and they really showed you a lot of stuff on like what was on 8chan and some of the stuff that was going on there. Like those are dark places that exist that the average person isn't aware of or doesn't want to believe exists. So it's like I think that's a little bit of like, instead of traumatizing yourself with understanding how dark and I guess how bad the worst people in the world are, it's almost easier to just discredit all of it and say that stuff doesn't exist. Or if it does
Yeah.
exist, it's not common. It's not, it's not like it's everywhere, and the more you dig down and you see, I mean, even things like the DC Madam's really interesting, just her story and how, she magically never made it to court, and who
All
knows
right.
what she would have exposed. But it is, and this kind of goes back to the beginning of the conversation where it's like what motivates these people. In some cases, I think it is some trauma that led to them doing what they're doing, and in other cases, it is probably a power fix that they just can't uh, they can't deal with or handle, and that's the next thing that gets them high. That's the fix that they need.
Right.
And like that Hostel movie, like I said, it was, the concept was really interesting. It just, this idea that you have these really rich billionaires who basically just were paying for these services because it gave them a high that they couldn't get anywhere else. And that's a legit issue too, when you're the elite of the elite, and you've had every expensive car, you've been to
Mm-hmm.
every exotic island, you've bought in every piece of expensive jewelry. Like, what's the next thing that gets you off? And And we also have a society that people who have those issues that get to that point where they're that rich, in many cases are psychopathic anyways. Because I almost feel like we have a system that rewards people that are slightly psychopathic and don't care for others as much as the average person. Because for you to be a cutthroat capitalist, for you to be
Yeah,
a
sadly
CEO of
so.
a company and do what's best for the bottom line every single time, you have to detach yourself from caring about others or morals or any of those things, because those things will just get in the way of doing what's financially best for your job or your corporation or your stockholders, whatever it may be.
Yep.
And
Did you
so
ever see that documentary, The Corporation? Like, it
I
made a great argument
the
for,
Canadian documentary, yep.
yeah, yeah. Like, if you did a personality profile of most major corporations, they are a sociopath. They are a literal sociopath, because that's how, like, you have to be sociopathic to just care about the bottom line. So yeah, absolutely. There is some incentive in our society to be, lying gets you ahead, being cutthroat, being two-faced, being a backstabber, like some of the people that get to the top, they didn't get there by just being the nicest person around. No, most people who are at the top, I don't believe they got there by being the nicest person around. Like, there are some decent people. I do believe there are some decent people who've achieved really amazing things, obviously. But at the very top, the people with the most power, because like you mentioned, Nick Bryant. Oh gosh, you ever see the way they talk about him in the Wikipedia talk page? Like, if you look at like the Franklin scandal, they won't allow Bryant to be cited because he's not a reliable source. Um, okay. Oh, well, that's not what Vanity Fair thought when they were interviewing him about the Epstein story. They obviously felt he was a reliable source. And hey, wait a minute, doesn't Wikipedia think that Vanity Fair is a reliable source? And if they are, then somebody that no, that apparently that's just not how it works. So yeah, I mean, like, I do believe that if you're trying to push, uh, push for certain things, like, like I don't know, I probably would have been a better used car salesman than in my current vocation. But that's the whole thing about a vocation too. Like, if tomorrow I ended up working at McDonald's, as I have multiple times in my life, yeah, I would still be writing on the weekends, and I would still be trying to do interviews and things, and because it's a vocation, which means it's a calling. A vocation is not always a job. A job you get paid for. A vocation is something that you do because it's what you were called to do.
Yeah, passion project. I mean,
Right.
I think that's why many of us do what we do, is because, I mean, in many cases it's not because financially it was a great decision, life decision.
Right.
It
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of
Uh.
it's because if we weren't doing something, regardless where we're working, if we are just doing a typical 9 to 5, we would feel like something's missing. We'd feel like we could contribute something,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and there's a lack of purpose in that. And that's another really big topic that I talk a lot about on the show, is this bigger issue of, like, we've created a world where we give people unfulfilling jobs, but we tell them go buy some material things and that will make you happy. And
Yeah,
yeah,
that'll
and the
fix it. And if
corporations,
that doesn't work, don't worry. We've got a new product for you to buy in a week, and that'll fix it. Oh,
yeah,
that didn't help. Well,
well,
next week we've got a. Yeah, yeah,
or next
absolutely.
week we put you on the
There's
pharma
no
drug.
amount of money. There's no amount of money that I would trade for, like I said, just the sense of fulfillment. That, like, I've done a few stories where I've helped people, and and that's, like, I don't know, I remember, like, in back in the early and mid 90s, like, there would be like the Channel 5 on your side, like the consumer guy, like every small town news station, I think, had that same guy in the 80s and 90s who would go like, if there's a shade tree mechanic who's screwing people, or there's a slumlord or whatever, and he would go and he would face down those guys and confront them on television. And I thought that was great, you know. And some of my biggest stories probably have actually been some of the smallest, because it was just, you know, somebody reached out to me and they had a story and something was going on and it was unfair, and I got to shine a light on that. And so yeah, like, you know, I'm never going to be a millionaire, and as long as I'm also never famous, then that's perfect for me, you know, because like I said, there's no amount of money I would trade for the sense of fulfillment, honestly.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, that's so important, and I think that is why people are self-medicating. That's why I think people are buying things that they don't really need because it does give
Mm-hmm.
them that temporary satisfaction. That movie, The Corporation, kind of went under the radar, and it's one I reference from time to time. I had somebody from the film years ago on,
Oh, that's awesome.
and it was I mean, I think they spent years putting together that documentary, and it was they really went into the psychology and all the psychology and science that goes into basically manipulating a consumer,
Yep.
and really it's almost an unfair fight, right? I mean, I tell people all the time, people will be like, oh, you know, this kid's always on his tablet, or this kid's always on, you know, playing video games, or this kid's you know, spending all his hard-earned money on
It's a feature,
on
not
Jordan
bug.
sneakers, you know. And it's like, yeah, I know what you're about to say. Yeah, without a doubt, it's it really is. That's, I mean, it's almost an unfair fight, because the reason why you can't put down that bag of Doritos, the reason why you can't stop yourself from buying that overpriced piece of clothing, is because they've manipulated you into thinking that's what you
Your
need, and
self
will, yeah,
worth and
yeah.
and all that is tied up. And you know, the girl that you like, you're not going to get her unless you have the right clothes and the right job and the right, and you know, and marketing sells all those ideas to us. I mean, think about it. There was a time in the first part of the 20th century when stuff was built to last. And then at some point around the 1950s, they had to convince everybody, hey, that stuff that was built to last is ugly. Throw it away and buy linoleum and plastic instead. Because look how sleek this chrome plated linoleum plastic is that will last 5 years instead of the. I lived in a place one time, a little basement apartment, and it had an Edison. My fan was an Edison, as in the Edison Electric Company, as in this thing was like 50 years old and it worked. It worked. You know why? Because it was made before 19, well, I mean, it was over 50 years old. It was at least made in like 1950, 1955, and this was in the 20 teens. So it was at least a 60-year-old product that was all metal and worked, you know? And marketing convinced everybody that all that stuff that would last 60 more years was ugly and should be thrown out in favor of chrome plated plastic and linoleum. You know, like it's a form of brainwashing, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, you go into old people's houses, the elderly, they have so many appliances that have been there forever that still work. And
Mm-hmm.
if you buy something new today, in a couple years, you're replacing it, and it breaks, or and you know, it's planned obsolescence. That's an you
Yep.
know,
Yep.
that's a part of the system. You know, you need to constantly find ways to get people to keep buying your products, or or to buy a new product, and that's one of the ways you do it. You engineer it to fail at some point, so there's no incentive in making something
And
that
the
lasts
companies
forever.
behind doing that are also getting tax breaks for, you know, funding PSAs that convince people, no, global warming is your fault. You know, when they're the ones creating this consumerist debt trap nightmare world, where everything breaks or goes obsolete within a few years, and you know, to create this huge churn where things have to be thrown out and replaced over and over and over again. Like, you know, when I was a kid, I remember it was all about reduce, reuse, recycle, and but at the same time, I remember, I watched a lot of PBS as a kid, so it was on the one hand reduce, reuse, recycle, and then I was like, but wait a minute, but aren't they saying that the landfills are also getting full, and it's like, but and sure, I'm not saying people shouldn't try to be decent to the environment, but it's a heck of a trick that these corporations, these massive corporations, and these ultra wealthy people, like I think Leonardo DiCaprio is a great example. Like, he gets on his little jet plane and he goes all over the world to tell people about how they should reduce their carbon footprint. Mr. DiCaprio, did you know that most average Americans will never have a carbon footprint as large as yours? So maybe you should just stuff it.
You're absolutely right. It's almost like the whole gas powered vehicle type thing. It's like you literally gave us no other options forever, right? You only force fed us gas powered vehicles, diesel powered vehicles. You didn't. Nobody looked into ethanol. Nobody looked into electric cars. If they did, they were either killed or suppressed. And then next thing you know, like, they're like, hey, you guys should all be guilty that you're driving a gas powered car. You
Right,
should all
yeah.
feel guilty. And what you're doing to the environment is horrendous. Oh, by the way, I know we've only given you 99%. Your options are electric or gas powered cars, and you have no other
Yeah, and
options.
most people like an electric car. Like, sure, it would be nice to pay less in gas mileage. Like, even if you didn't care about the environment, but for most people, those kind of cars aren't an option. And then you don't. That's even if we don't get into the fact that, like with Teslas, for instance, I forget what the there's an actual equation of like energy conserved over the energy spent in saving the energy. So, like, with the lithium mining for those batteries, like the ecological toll on the environment of some of these alternatives even are, it's like, nothing against green lifestyle and people who are trying to help the environment, but what's sad and scary to me is I think a lot of these cases, the green industry is just an industry, just like like whether it's medical care or law enforcement industry or the incarceration industry. They're all industries, so they're constantly going to be needing new clients, new customer base, and also customer retention. And even when that's a bad thing for society, their job is to consider that bottom line at all times. So yeah, it is. It really is. It's screwed up on so many levels, that it's like I said, it's easy to become, I don't know, I guess, black pilled, or like, feel like there's no point. Uh, but that's another one of those things where, like I said, I'm pretty sure that that's what they want. So don't let that, like, you can't let that get to you. Like, of course it looks hopeless, but that's the neat thing about hope. Until you give up hope, you're not hopeless. And even people who've given up their hope, like, if they gain hope again, then they're not hopeless now, right? Like, that's the whole thing. So yeah, it's important to be realistic about the world and see these problems and issues, but you can't, like, look at the world and say, oh well, it's too big a problem, I give up. um eh, you know even if the best you can do is keep morale up for others who, like I said, I don't know that I'm going to change the world, but if I can change a few people's minds or help a few people who were already down that road and just just needed to see that it wasn't just in their head, you know, then then I've done a good thing in the world then.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for people listening who want to connect with you, keep up with your work.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, easiest way, like I guess the main hub would be just Phil Fairbanks. That's PhilFairbanks, philfairbanks.com. And, I've also started doing like a little podcast thing. And, the only real theme to the podcast through the plastic screen is it's just people and topics that I'm interested in. There's no, like a lot of podcasts have like an overarching theme, whether it's true crime or conspiracy stuff, or no, this is literally just whatever I'm interested in, whether it's art or entertainment or science or herbalism or just whatever, and some true crime and news and just all kinds of stuff. So you can see also some of my previous interviews, not only ones that I've done or ones with me at that site. And I'm also on Twitter, twitter.com/Kafka guy, as in Franz Kafka. And the book, by the way, you can get it in Kindle. It's on Kindle Unlimited. So if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can start reading it right now. It's already paid for with your monthly subscription to Kindle Unlimited. It's on there. Also available on Audible, and I think the Apple Audiobooks platform, and other places you can get the paper book. I forget the name of the one place where just in the past few weeks it's now for sale in Australia. So there's an Australian bookstore I saw online that's selling it. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Powell's, which is like indie bookstore, their online site. You can order it through there. Even Target.com apparently has it for sale now. But yeah, any of those places. And if you want to reach out to me, there's a contact page on the site at philfairbanks.com, or you can email me at, once again, Kafka Guy, KAFKAGUY. Kafka Guy at gmail.com is one of the best ways to get a hold of me, apart from, like I said, just try and send me a DM at Twitter or go through the contact form page at the website. But yeah, I'm always interested in hearing from folks, and hey, if you can't afford the book, by the way, I've still got I can get you a PDF copy, or I've got some promo codes for the audiobook version. I don't know who would want to listen to my voice for 6 hours and 9 minutes, I think is the length. But if you can handle 6 hours and 9 minutes of my voice, then I will gladly give you the audiobook promo code for Audible. But yeah, so like I said, any of those resources, you can see some other videos and stuff and interviews that I've done with people or that people have done with me, and links to the book and interviews I've done about the book or other subjects. So yeah, that's probably the best place is philfairbanks.com. But like I said, you can also email me or drop me a DM at Twitter. If you don't hear back from me, though, I've noticed this is weird. Like, I don't know what's the purpose of having your DMs open if they're not going to send your messages to you, because I still have to check my like other folder or whatever. Because I mean, like, I thought that's what having open DMs was. Like, anybody can send you a DM. No, apparently not. My mom had sent me a DM, but I didn't follow her on Twitter, and I didn't see it until like way later. So I think that's kind of messed up. That despite me having DMs open, I don't always get those messages. So if you don't get it there, then like I said, my email is on the website, or there's a contact form there. And yeah, definitely love to hear from people. Though lately, I'll go ahead and admit I may be a little late. I've been dealing with this kind of neck issue, a spinal injury that it's going on 6 months of that. But hopefully, sometime in the next 4 to 6 weeks, it looks like I'll finally be able to get surgery for that, and hopefully can get back to like right now, any kind of typing I do is mostly through a touch screen, or literally from laying on my side here in bed. But yeah, hopefully in the next, by August or so, I'm going to be back to writing. I'm going to be back to being able to sit up and type at a keyboard again, and I'll be better at responding to folks. But yeah.
Yeah, I've seen you've done shows on Kratom, right?
Oh yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
I'm
Oh gosh,
I'm a
I'm
big.
so thankful for that right now.
I was gonna
I'll
say,
be honest. I'm also taking like boswellia and bromelain and turmeric and curcumin. Like just like literally throw it all at me right now. I've got aquama and kratom. I've got it all. Yeah.
yeah, I'm a big fan of natural remedies, and
Hmm.
I've done a podcast with Chris Bell who did Leaf of Faith.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so it's when you were talking about your injuries, and I know you've talked about it on a podcast. I'm like, oh, I'm probably a good time to use it would be now. It's a
Yeah. I had a friend ask, and she's like, "Hey, I know you probably need it. Can I send you some kratom?" And I just had to send her a picture where I've got like a half a kilo in this big Ziploc bag. I'm like, nah, I'm good. Trust me. I've got, I'm not gonna let it get below 250 grams. No, no. I'm gonna make sure that I'm stocked up on kratom for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll send you links to the show once it's up, and I'll put all your links and all your information in the show description. And hopefully we do this again in the near future.
Hey, yeah, for sure. Like I said, once I get things under control and back to work again, I've got one book to do some revisions on, and another one that I was still working on conducting interviews and things for. So yeah, I've got this was just my first book, but there's already like the next five in line are already in some form of nascence at this point already. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and if you ever want to come on to promote any of those, let me know.
Definitely.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Hopefully you feel better. And hopefully when we talk next time, you'll be, a little bit more mobile and
Oh
feeling a little
yeah,
better.
definitely. Thank you, sir.
Great.
Yeah. It's always an honor when folks want to have me on and talk about this, because yeah, like I said, it's not a fun topic. Hopefully, maybe for a future show, it'll be something that isn't quite so dark. Because like I said, it's a topic I'd covered off and on, but it's not like I realized when writing this that there's a difference between covering it off and on and spending all day and night on it for months at a time. And you can't do that. And I want to remind people, by the way, if I leave people with anything, is it's important to not turn a blind eye. It's also just as important to get some shut eye once in a while, because you're not doing anybody favors if you get to a point where you're demoralized, or you're not sleeping, and you're not and you let this stuff get to you to a point where it affects your physical or mental well-being. No, you can't do that either. So once again, if I leave people on any kind of note, I guess find that balance for yourself, because it'll be different for everybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. You need to take care of yourself so then you can have the time and energy to do these more fulfilling things in your life, and pursue these passion projects, and try to
Absolutely.
create our own little ripple in the world. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and hopefully we talk again soon.
No, definitely. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil.
Believe in the ripple effect.